Today I'm going to do one of the videos that I've been requested to do over the years, over and over and over. And I was like, I'm probably never going to do that until today. We're going to do it today. Today we're going to teach you how to cable manage like a pro. Not like me, like a pro. Drop your temperatures and get maximum performance from your processor with Corsair's new A500 air cooler. Intuitive slide and lock fan mount system allows for variable mounting height, providing the largest range of RAM compatibility and ease of installation, while the ML120 fans provide high static pressure at low volume levels. To learn more about the all-new A500 from Corsair, click the link in the description below. Actually, I need to tear the cables out now. That was just the intro.
Oh yeah.
So I think this is about where most people find themselves right after they've put their components in their system, and then they're like, now this isn't as bad as it could be. We could have Corsair's Commander Pro system in here, which although the lighting is great, I absolutely hate the way Corsair has handled their wiring. It's like module into a module, then 6 wires coming out of that, and another module over here, and it's just, it's awful. So what I chose with this particular system, these are the Fractal Design RGB fans. Can you remember what they're called? Prisma fans. I think they're called Prismas. But anyway, I like them because they are agnostic. They just use regular 3-pin RGB headers. And you can find these on pretty much every motherboard. Now there's a couple of extra things that you're gonna want to do this cleanly. So you're gonna wanna take your happy butt down to your hardware store, pick up some small zip ties. There's 800 of them. We'll be using 400 in this build alone. Now, also get yourself a nice pair of fine side cutters. You don't want the big ones. You don't want the big giant clippers like you would use to cut cable. You want these small ones that you can work in between cables to trim. Now, some other things that I've got in here to make this a little bit easier. I have got 2 pigtail PWM fan headers. So it's a single plug onto the motherboard, terminating to 3 to handle 3 fans. And then I've got 2 of these, obviously. And then I've got 1 double fan one right here that goes from 1 to 2. And believe it or not, I actually take that off of one of these. So I end up with 4 fans on a single header. Now, to kind of address that real quick, pretty much all modern motherboards can handle at least 3 fans. Most fans are only like 0.14 amp or something like that. And most fan headers can handle an amp. So you're gonna have to do the math to determine how many fans that you can plug into a single header. Worst case scenario, you burn out that header, it stops working, and then that you're just unhappy. What happens here with Fractal Design fans is they give you 1 header that you could plug into a source. In this case, it's gonna be our motherboard, which is a Zenith Extreme. And then they give you 1 male, which has the pin side, and then this is obviously the side that has the holes. You can use this to daisy chain onto other fans and such. Now, most RGB headers that are digital can handle a certain amount of LEDs. It's not a certain amount of fans, it's a certain amount of LEDs. Usually it's something like 200 LEDs a single header can handle, and we don't have nearly that many LEDs in our fans. So we're gonna actually be daisy chaining all of our fans together and then using a single DRGB or digital RGB header. You obviously want to pay attention which header you plug it into, because sometimes some brands like to have it be a 4-pin hole on the end and it's not plugged off like that one. And then you plug it into a 12-volt RGB header, which is not digital, which is 5 volt, and then you blow up all the LEDs in the controller in your fans. So make sure you plug it into the right header, just double check. Anyway, moving on, I think this is where most people start. And what happens is people start going, okay, especially if they're new builders, they're more concerned with making sure everything's plugged in the right way. So they start going, okay, this is my 24 pin, and then they start, plugging it in, and there's no concept of order. There's no order around here. Order in the cart. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. So what I personally like to do is I like to kind of separate my cables and just sort of move them off to where they're kind of by themselves. And as you can see, I've got it right now, the PSU loose, because one of my major tips I'm going to show you here in a second is I don't plug everything into the power supply first. I plug everything in to where they're going to be plugged in on the front side first, run them through, and then plug them into the power supply. Because then it's a lot easier to manage the excess. Because it's managing the excess that makes your system clean. Finding places to stuff it. The other thing too is making sure you get rid of any cables that you don't need. So what I think a lot of beginners do is they just plug all the cables into their power supply. But you'll notice in this instance, we have our 24 pin, which is for our motherboard power. We have our PCI Express, which is for obviously our graphics card. We've got 2 of those. They are split so that you can have a 6-pin or an 8-pin. Your power supply, depending on which cables they come with, might have a little daisy chain or a little pigtail coming off of it where one cable can power your power supply. But I only have one SATA plug for this. So as you can see here, I don't have all the SATA plugged in. I only have one SATA, which gives me 1, 2, 3, 4 headers here to plug into something. Now I don't have that many SATA devices in this system. I don't have any extra RGB controllers. I don't have a water cooler or an AIO in here, which tends to use a SATA plug for its pump. Some of the older coolers use Molex, or like custom water cooled, we use a Molex, but AIOs are usually always SATA now. But the case has its own SATA header on it for built-in lighting that would be in here, because this is a 710i, so it's an intelligent, and it has its own light stuff. But we also have a single 10 terabyte hard drive down here, and I don't think I have anything else in here, honestly, that uses SATA. So that's why I've got this one cable. And then over here you can see I've got 2 EPS 8 pins, which are just actually 4 pins, because believe it or not, CPU powers in pairs of 4s. Because I'm running a Threadripper 3960, which is the 24 core 48 thread variant of Phil's overpowered 32 core 64 thread system, but most people are going to only need a single 8-pin header for any regular system. So I started talking earlier about laying things out. Every case is going to have its case plugs. So that's going to be a USB 3.0, pretty much everything has USB 3.0. If you have USB-C, you're going to have this plug, which is I forget what the connector is actually called, but it's that guy. And then you're going to have your reset power button, headphone jack, HD audio, maybe a USB, regular USB, depending on the age of your case. You might have an old school USB 2 plug. But these are the plugs that every case has to make the buttons do something. Oh, and then we have our SATA plug for our hard drive, which I always plug in last, because these connectors that plug into the back of the hard drive right here, the little plastic tabs on here are very brittle. If you leave this plugged in right there, and you're moving cables and stuff around, you could potentially break that plastic piece off inside the SATA connector. That's a bad day. So I always plug these in last and set it aside. So we've got our front side fans and RGB. So we know those go to the front of the case, so I am gonna move those that way, just to make it really obvious. The cables are gonna be coming from that direction. These right here are the same fan headers I just showed you from the front, but for the top. So, and then we've got the same headers, RGB and fan coming from the rear fan right here. Since that's the rear, I'm going to put that over the top as well. So now I've kind of got a bit of a visual representation of where stuff is coming from, instead of having it all hanging in the back and getting all tangled. And when all the cables are black, it's just that much easier to get confused. Now this is the part where I said people will start going, okay, I'm going to plug in my 24 pin. I'm going to plug in my EPS and all that. I don't do it that way. I always keep the power supply out of the system. And then I keep, if they're modular anyway, this is only going to apply to modular power supplies. If you don't have a modular power supply, then you are going to have to do this in kind of the reverse order of what I'm saying, which is where you plug them in at the end. But the concept I'm going to show you in terms of routing, bundling, tracing, all that sort of stuff is going to apply. Take this guy, if it's modular, set it aside. This is going to sound really cliche, very Aesop's fables, or religious, I guess you will. Think of this as like a jar. Now imagine you had to fit a pile of rocks in this jar and this amount of sand in that same jar. If you pour the sand in first, the rocks aren't going to fit because the rocks go on top of the sand, right? And then there's all that free space in between all the rocks. But if you put all the rocks in first and then you pour the sand is going to fill in all those gaps and you can get it to fit. It's the same concept I use when it comes to trying to cram rocks and sand into a computer, which is exactly what we do. Now, before I start plugging stuff in, I take a quick look around the system to see where the case is designed for cables to go. Every case built in the last 10 years has some sort of cable management built in. Even if it's just holes for you to pass cables through, that counts as cable management. Now, the NZXT 710i is not designed for an EATX motherboard. However, as you can see, I crammed one in here anyway. So what that meant is the white piece that goes right here, doesn't fit into its native spot anymore. So what I actually did at the end of this build is I just double-sided taped it in right here so it filled this hole. And I'll be doing that at the end. I just wanted to point that out right now. If you guys have noticed that I have an EATX board in here, that's why. But our 24 pin and our CPU power is right here. That's kind of fortunate because most motherboards have the EPS power up here in the top left. But as you can see, if you look right here, that's where you would pass your CPU power through if you were going to be doing a more traditional layout. But because I've got this nice big opening right here, I can go ahead and just comfortably plug in my 24 pin and just let it dangle. Not to be confused with Lieutenant Dangle if you watch Reno 911. The nice thing about this case too is, as you probably saw on the other side when it was turned around, it has these nice cable grooves right here, which have zip tie or Velcro built into it. This is where your zip ties come in, because I clipped about, I don't know, 50 of these zip ties off just to get this ready to show you guys. I always zip tie like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along the way, especially if it's a paracord like this, which is very flexible. And what I tend to do is use a lot of zip ties and then end up cutting some and redoing it, because I want to keep it organized as I go. And then I can change any zip ties or add more or take some away that I don't need later on. So because I want this all to stay together nice and tight right here, where it's going into this channel, I'm gonna sort of just put this on here, loose, not tight. See how I can still move it? That way I can put it where I want it. Get it here to the end, right where the channel is. Then I can tighten that down a little bit. And then I'm gonna take this Velcro piece and I'm gonna also just sort of hold my 24 pin in like that, loosely, right? So I can still adjust it if I want. But you can see by starting with the larger cable, I can see now this cable almost by itself is gonna take up this entire channel, which is fine. But you see how this is kind of flaring out right there and not wanting to stay? On that bend is where I'm gonna put another zip tie. And the reason why I'm doing this is when they add these channels and stuff like this, sometimes the case on the back does not have a lot of room between the channel and it, because they kind of assume like, oh, you're using, what the hell is that? They're painting our building and loud noises keep happening. We're just gonna work through the noise, that's fine. But you can see right now I've got this bend here, it's coming from the 24 pin, it's nice and straight, it's out of the way. But I bundle it and zip tie it because I don't want it expanding and kind of fraying out, because then what it's gonna do is it's gonna take up more room, and then I've actually had it to where it lifts up too high and then it's hard to put the case back panel back on. And then I can just be like, boop, because we know that's where it's gonna go, right? So there's our 24 pin, nice and managed. Now the next thing I wanna do is going to be well, I guess I can do CPU power in this instance, because normally I'd be putting CPU power through here. You can see they even give us a channel to come straight down to our power supply. So if you have a more traditional case, which I think like 9 out of 10 of you are gonna have, probably even more than 9 out of 10 of you, probably 99 out of 100 of you, unless you're running a Zenith Extreme, are gonna have your EPS power going up into your motherboard like that, and then you're gonna have it come down like this to your power supply. But that's not how this motherboard is laid out. So once again, I'm gonna turn the case back around, and you'll be doing this a lot. And this is when having some sort of a lazy Susan that can handle a case is really nice, or having it on a small enough table that you can just walk around it a bunch. These are the two headers I'm gonna plug them into right here. And if I were doing extreme overclocking on this, I'd be using a 6-pin PCI Express right there as well. That's another supplemental power. Just shows you how much power these systems can draw if you, if you allow them to. So, same thing. In fact, I think I might even come up through the top. There we go. So I didn't put any zip ties on that yet, and that's fine, because as you see, I could pull some of the slack out there. And I'm gonna probably get 2 zip ties started on here. The zip ties are also nice because they keep any radius bend you put in there kind of intact. And now you can see why I said the small side cutters are obviously gonna make life easier for you. Big side cutters, it's too easy to accidentally cut right through a wire because you can't tell because they're so thick. So now I can pull this back through like this. Now you can see there's this fan header right here too. I didn't unplug my fan cooler, my air cooler. This has a PWM splitter to 2 headers because we have 2 fans in here. I just left that plugged in because it's pretty obvious that your air cooler is going to have to plug in somewhere on the surface of the front, which is going to be either the CPU header, CPU optional, maybe a high amp fan. Same thing with an AIO. You're going to find your AIO header, plug it in there, and then kind of stuff the cables back underneath it or something where you can't see it, which is exactly what I've done here. So even though I have already cable managed this case, this is where you start to realize like, oh, you have to move things around, you know, and you're not committed to anything until obviously you're done, and even then you're still not committed, because as you can see, I'm doing it all over again right now. Because initially I had the 24 pin and the 8 pin coming out the side right here. And I thought this time around maybe I would try it the other way to see if it looks any cleaner. And I like the way it looks from the front. But because I'm now coming off the top, as you can see, instead of coming in the side with the 24 pin, I need to move the 24 pin over to this side, because the 8 pin needs to go there, because I don't want to cross it. We want to avoid crossing cables as much as possible for 2 reasons. 1, it adds height, because they're on top of each other instead of next to each other. And then 2, it just doesn't look good. It's the same reason why people get all triggered when they see a water-cooled loop that has crossing tubes. Depending on your aesthetic you're going for, you can make crossing tubes look good, but you're never going to make crossing cables really look very good. And NZXT's thought of this too. I know this is not a sponsored NZXT video, but they've thought of this, which is why they've got this cutout right here for the cables to make it in. So there's a big cutout right there. So now what I'm going to do is, because I know that these are going to be going together, I'm now going to zip tie these together. And when I do that, I could then, if I wanted to make a little extra room or cleaner, cut off the individual zip ties I put on. You notice I only put 2 per cable. And then we'll just make a single cable bundle out of these 2. So I'm not going to be really running too much more through this, because I don't think I'm going to run my PCI Express through here, because if I did, it would have to be coming out of the top right here. Like even if let's say I moved this guy up in some way to make room, the PCI Express would be coming out the top and then going back down. So I think I'm just gonna let the PCI Express go through like right here, which means I'll just come up next to this tray, and I'm gonna let this tray do nothing but manage the 24 pin and the 8 pin for me. And then because here's our 2 8 pins, we know the power supply goes over here. We'll just get out of the way. There. Mischief managed. I'm a nerd. So now that that's managed, more importantly, it looks all right on the back, but if we look at it from the front, you can see it's clearly nice and organized. The 2 8 pins going up there, 24 pin coming out there. And if you look at it from the front, you can't see those wires at all. And I'm gonna save the fans and the RGBs for last, because they, believe it or not, are gonna be the biggest mess in this system. All right, so what I'm gonna do next is handle the rest of the case wiring. This, as I already showed you, is just the front panel power reset button. What I do too is like I said earlier jokingly, I said I just like to stuff it. Quite honestly, that's what I do. I just find a place where I can hide the wire and I tuck it away. Now, a real common place for that is a drive cage. If you have a drive cage that's not removable, like this one here, although this is slidable and stuff, it is removable, I guess. If yours is riveted in and you can't remove it, that's a perfect place to just take excess wires, especially if you have a non-modular power supply. Just, kind of fold the wires back on themselves like this, put a zip tie around them, and then do this with them. So we've got PCI Express power, but before I do that, I want to handle our USB-C connector here, and I want to handle our USB 3.0. This is the one that sucks. This is the one, this is the best plug they could come up with, but it's a stiff, rigid plug. It's huge, it's ugly, and half the time there's nothing you can do with it. Like, you can't really bend it very much. Unfortunately, these are flat. A lot of times they're a big, thick, round cable. It's just ugly. So what I'm gonna do here is, because it goes right here, right under the 24 pins, there's actually room for 2 of them. I'm gonna go ahead and plug it in now. Now I can see what I've got leftover wires, cable-wise, or leftover cable-wise here. I think I want it to go up in there. It could also go like that. It actually works out. And then just have it kind of smooshed in there like that. You want to avoid this as much as you can. for the simple fact that you don't want to break the wire internally. So I'm going to rethink that a little bit. I'm going to come here. So as you can see now, I just have it looping back in that tray. And then when I look at it from the front, it just looks like it comes right out with the 24 pin, and that's fine. See, this is the part that sucks because I want to use this tray, but I really feel like they should have made it bigger. I'm not afraid to modify my stuff. And because I want it to maybe wrap around this puck and go back into that hole right there, that little gap right here isn't big enough to let it happen. So I'm going to trim it just a little bit, which should be enough. There we go. See that? Now let me show you what that allows me to do. If I need to get rid of some of that length, I can do it here. See that? And then do the same little trim here. And that is way better. Because I will tell you right now, I'm one of those people that subscribe to the, I kind of don't care what's going on back here. Organizing it back here definitely makes it better because if you have to unplug something or replace something, it's easier than just having a ball of wires just shoved in there and you've got to deal with all this later. At least now you can sort of trace it and have it make a little bit of sense. And I think this looks perfectly fine. That's actually exactly what that puck is for routing wires. Okay, moving on. This is our front panel. We are going to go ahead and just route this down through. Okay, so now we've got that, as you can see, coming up through here. And then we've got this slack here. And now what we can do is we can just sort of look at this and be like, all right, right there is where we sort of need it to be. And we can fold it over like this. And then we will let the Velcro do its job. And I know that this might seem like some really common sense type stuff, but if you go and you look at pictures of people's builds, you'll see what happens is they become so focused on whether or not the system works, they don't come back and do any of this. So that corner is kind of done. And yeah, I know it's all flip-floppy and foldy, but I can't do much with a flat cable that's too long. I am not going to use HD audio. I never plug HD audio in because no matter how much they try and insulate these wires, or I should say shield these wires, they always pick up buzzing noises from the computer, especially if it runs right along any sort of a power cable. So I am going to, what I do in a lot of instances is I'll take the front panel off and just unplug it, or even cut it off of the front header. But I didn't do that in this case. I'm just going to be doing the thing like I showed you earlier, which is letting it sort of be like out of sight, out of mind down there. We need to do PCI Express. So let's do that now. Grab the side that's listed for graphics card, because your modular cables are going to be PSU. There's going to be a side label PSU and then PCIe. So the one that doesn't say PSU is obviously what goes to your graphics card. Push it through, plug it in, and do just like we did with the 24 pin. Now, because these zip ties are going to be visible, once you cut them off, rotate the little coupler part to the back so you can't really see it from the front. Now the nice thing is, on most chassis you're going to have these little tabs. And these are designed for you to have a place to hook a zip tie or any sort of cable management tie to. You've got them all over the place where there's no channel. And you got one right here too, and you can see I actually used that for my USB header. So I'm going to be doing that with this guy as well. I'm going to run that through there. And this is what's going to be holding my PCI Express cables down. There we go. Make sure it's not pulling too tight on anything metal edge. Make sure it can move freely, and PCI Express cables are now done. So all the major cables, with the exception of our SATA, are in there. What I need to do now is USB 3.0, fans, and RGB. So I'm going to basically do this just like I did with our USB-C cable. The USB 3 cable is also keyed, and there's a lot of pins. You want to make sure you line them all up before you bend a pin. It should go in pretty smoothly without any need for force. Oh hey, I see a mark right here. Apparently this is the way I had it before, because that's from where it was in here. It's good to know I'm consistent consistently bad according to some people. Consistency's consistency, bro. See how much I have to like undo things? Like it's all Velcroed down and you gotta undo it. It's because you don't want things moving around and while you're working on other parts of the case. So always tie things down where they're gonna be. And this is why in every single speed build competition I've ever had that I've lost has been because of this, and I do this every time, even in a speed build. And what I'd like to point out is I've actually won some speed builds doing this, having beautiful cable management and still built the PC faster. And then other times, barely lost by a matter of minutes and had it look this good that you're gonna see at the end, or like you saw at the start, while the other system just looks like ass. All right, let's take a look at what it looks like from the front so far. So that's how it's gonna end up looking. Yeah, believe it or not, there's just double-sided tape on the top right here, taped up here. If you look at the amount of wiring mess we have, that ain't not too badder. Next, because I only have 2 SATA devices, I'm gonna go ahead and plug those in now. And again, that being the case plug and the hard drive plug. So I'm gonna let the case plug have the one on the end, and we're fortunate that this cable lets the one on the end be flat and not be a right angle like a lot of them do. We are going to step down to our next size, or our next header, plug that into our hard drive, and we are gonna take all the excess and shove it down there. And that's over here now with the power supply cable. So these are all of our power supply cables. We could put this power supply in right now, but I don't want it yet. I want to get the rest of this all managed. Because if I do this the same as I did before, we are going to have quite the bundle of wires zigzagged, crimped down on top of each other, zip tied, and tied to these guys. Because, like I said, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 RGB headers and 7 fan headers that I now have to make sense out of. And I remember I hated this last time, and I'm gonna hate it more this time. So I'm gonna focus on fan power first. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug these 3 into my splitter. And the nice thing about this is this sort of gives me a place to be like, okay, here's our links. So I'm gonna zip tie these together just for now, and I might undo this later, right here. Now that allows me to do is sort of just take out the slack, and I can just sort of see now where does our mess go. So I'm gonna zip tie these along the way, and I'm gonna use a lot of zip ties because these cables just have a mind of their own. See right there how they're like fanning out? And no matter how much you try and train this, they're gonna do that, and it sucks, but you're not gonna see it, so whatever. But what I'm doing is I'm taking the slack out all the way back to where they're mounted. So doing that way, I've kind of pushed the mess somewhere where I can manage it. What I can do now, if I want to make this a little bit cleaner, is I'm gonna actually zip tie it to itself. There's a hole that we're obviously not using on the fan, and then zip tie it down to the fan. And then I'm gonna find a header on the motherboard I wanna plug those into. You can only kind of see it because the white wire is actually the ground wire on this one, and it's visible on the top, which kind of sucks. But it's a white and black case, so it just goes with the theme. So now that you guys have seen like the concept of how I think about the wiring and stuff, let me just finish wiring up these other fan plugs and RGB, and we'll show you the very last step. All right, so here are all the RGB cables. As you can see, I sort of made a harness out of it. And the thing is, we're gonna have some extra length, obviously. So what I've done here is, as you can see, I've zip tied it, but every time I plugged in a daisy chain, it's folded back on itself and zip tied, folded back, zip tied, to where we get to this. Because what we want at the end, obviously, is just the one cable that's feeding all of the daisy chain. Now, I said earlier it was gonna line up here, which is actually perfect because I've got this pigtail right here that can go up through there. The header for the RGB is right on the other side right here on the bottom. And then as soon as I zip tie this up here, it's gonna be up and out of the way and clear of the power supply, which will then just be our very last step, literally, is plug in our power supply. So I'm gonna use these hooks, which are very nicely placed. If these hooks were not here, you can get, they're just a little stick-on cable management. I don't know what they're called. Basically, it's like a little twist deal. It's got two little balls on the end of it. And like you twist it and they'll snap together, and you untwist it and it opens up. So it like does that. You can get those and put those in your cases anywhere you want to make it, shut up Phil, to make it a lot easier to cable manage. So I'm just zip tying these up out of the way. I'll probably just do the 2. I'll do one more right there. But you see how these are like still like It's got a mind of their own. Oh, something else I did too, you might have noticed, is I put tape around each one of the RGB plugs. They don't stay together very well, and they'll pull apart, and if one unplugs, every light after that won't light up. So I just put a little bit of electrical tape around it to keep it from coming apart. But now that that's done, we just have to take our SATA cable, plug it in, and I always plug it in right behind the graphics card, because then it's kind of hidden. Shove it all in underneath the hard drive, plug it in. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna start plugging these into our power supply right through the back right here. And what I tend to do is start with whatever goes on the bottom and work your way up. Because if you have all the top plugs in, then it's harder to get to the bottom ones. All right, now that everything's plugged in, we can go ahead and slowly push it in, make sure wires don't interfere anywhere. The last thing we're gonna do is put on our back cover, and then we're gonna see if there's any wires poking out anywhere we don't wanna see them. Stuff. Trying to teach people how to do something like a pro, and you're an idiot yourself. Keep it up, Jay. People are gonna realize you don't know anything. Now it's all done and perfect the first time. All right, let's go and take a look at the front side. Ugh. There, not bad. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna take my little trim piece that really has no function anymore, other than to look pretty. Our side panel for the back is white. So if there's any wires that we don't like sticking in a spot we don't like them, it's gonna definitely show. And we also wanna make sure that it closes. Remember how I said if you put wires on top of wires, they'll bunch up? These fan headers right here, these fan plugs, are not causing it to close. Because unfortunately, NZXT did not build any sort of like extra height into the back panel. You can see it's just perfectly flush. A lot of case manufacturers will have it like pop out some and then go back, so you actually have like a cubby built into the side panel. This one doesn't have that. So like I said earlier, if you build it up too high in these trays, then you probably won't be able to get it to close, and that's exactly what I just dealt with right now. So all I had to do was move those plugs where they can now just sort of chill out kind of over here. I mean, it's not tied down, but that's fine. There we go. And this is what it looks like for the finished product. Oh, a little piece of Velcro sticking out right there. There we go. Less than 2 hours though of cable management got us this. Now this is something anyone can do with any system at any time. If you're looking at yours going, oh man, you can always take it apart and rebuild it, make the cables look nice. And all we use were zip ties and side cutters and a little bit of electrical tape for the RGB stuff that you can easily get at any hardware store. This is something that you would definitely be much happier looking at than just seeing cables strewn about. You guys have been asking me over and over and over, Jay, please do a cable management guide. There you go, there it is. What are your best cable management tips? Put them down in the comments below. And as always, guys, subscribe if you're not. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.